Welcome to the Pitchwerks podcast. I'm Scott McTaggart. Over the last 20 years, I've been a sales rep, a marketer, a manager, an executive, a consultant, and an advisor. This show is designed to give you access to my list of contacts so that you can learn more about how to present your ideas at work and succeed in your career.
Startups and salespeople, marketers and managers from the Epicast network in Pittsburgh. It's the Pitchwerks podcast.
I got assigned into a shop floor type of job, right, as a mechanical engineer.
Right.
And I said, I started picturing myself 10 years, 15 years down the road. So I said, I'm going to be building clutches or designing clutches for the rest of my life, right?
Hey everybody, it's Scott. It's Wednesday and it's the Pitchwerks podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in. This week, Prashant Ambe is in the house and he's going to tell us about TiE Pittsburgh. He is the president of the local chapter of a very helpful support network for entrepreneurs. I like the way they do events. I like a lot of the things that happen over there. And it's not one of these things where they just sort of didactically push things down on the audience. It's interactive. It's really cool. But the other thing Prashant brings to the party is this story of just constant transformative change throughout his own career, the way he talks to founders. Starts off as a mechanical engineer, moves on to software. He's advising founders and startups, and he can actually give you the recipe to become one of those unicorn startups that you read about. I like Prashant. Let's find out what he has to say about TiE Pittsburgh, about your own career, about founders in general. All right, now joining us in the Pitchwerks studio. It's not the Pitchwerks studio. Now joining us in the Epicast studios, where Pitchwerks occasionally pitches its tent. Prashant Ambe, president of TiE Pittsburgh. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very good.
So you and I have a ton of ground to cover. You and I first met because we have a bunch of friends in common. Ray Milham, who has been on this show, among them.
Absolutely.
And your history started out with engineering, and you had a fairly corporate type approach early on in your career. And then somewhere along the line, entrepreneurship, innovation, and whatnot entered your bloodstream. And I really like this because that's not something you typically find as like a corporate type person who moves the big company with a lot of employees toward entrepreneurship, innovation, those kinds of things. But here you are, the president of TiE after all of that. From a mindset perspective, tell me, were you always an entrepreneurial type of a person, or did you learn it along the way?
No, I wasn't. Actually, I was never an entrepreneurial type of person. So what happened was I'm basically by training a mechanical engineer. Right. So when I joined a software company as, in the quality assurance group. So basically testing software.
Right.
And so the first opportunity I got to start leading people was when my boss got promoted.
Okay.
Right? So he rose up the rank, and he obviously saw some promise in me, and then he said, "Okay, now why don't you take over my job?"
How old are you at this point?
So I was my guess is about 33.
Did you receive any type of managerial training at that point?
Absolutely not. So it was more technical management. So there was technical aspect of it, and it was managing a couple of people.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I enjoyed that. I found that maybe, this is what I want to do because it's leveraging not just your time, but also other people's time, and the ability to work with them and trust them and things like that.
Did you enjoy it?
I really enjoyed it. So that's when I was in this dilemma because I was very technical at the point, very analytic.
Right.
And I said to myself, maybe I should try to dabble more in this. And that's basically when I made a decision to take a management track as opposed to, grow in the technical arena.
And that is actually, you're kind of reading my mind a little bit in terms of why I ask these questions and where I'm going. Because I think a lot of times we find an engineering type or a product type person really invests in that. They really think, I started off as an engineer. I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to be the best engineer I can. Management is a different discipline that I didn't study. The analytical disciplines, I see more people feeling as though management must be as difficult as engineering or must be as structured as engineering. And then it feels like they are less likely to want to jump into a management track.
That is absolutely right.
Yeah.
In fact, I have, my daughter is a biomedical engineer, and she absolutely doesn't want to do any management. So she's scared. She dreads it.
Right.
And she has an opportunity, actually, because her boss sees in her the ability to lead, but she doesn't want to do it. Right. So I've been talking to her to try to convince her to do that. But anyway, the reason I changed track is because at the time I had some inkling, right? And later on, as I went through my career, I think it was confirmed that you should, there are three axes, obviously, for all professionals. There's a cultural axis.
Okay.
So you have to change culture. You have to change your skill sets. You have to grow, right, in terms of growing your skill sets. And the third one, obviously, is the industry in which, right? So my take is that you have to change at least one or two of them every 3 to 5 years.
So when you say culture, let's dig into that. Do you mean culture in the sense of maybe like a strict regimented company versus a looser, I don't know, more creative environment? Is that a good?
I'm not saying more or less. For example, this actually applies to everybody, right? Whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're working in a big company.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a big company, you could, for example, switch locations, right?
Yes.
Or for ANSYS, where I was working,
which is a tremendous company with a sterling reputation.
Absolutely. And I joined ANSYS like I was the 110th employee. It was a startup at the time, right? But with acquisitions, as we started growing, we started acquiring companies, and that was a flavor of a change of culture.
Yeah.
Because there were geographic locations. We acquired some companies where there were teams in India, for example, teams in UK, teams in Germany. So that flavor came in. Cultural changes came in. And as the company was becoming bigger and bigger, it went from a family-oriented operation to a bigger operation. Right?
Yeah, small startup-y kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
To something that has to dictate best practice and sort of, I'm going to say it in stark terms, but sort of lay down the law for the new people. Like this may have been the way you did it in the German office, but we don't do it that way here. Welcome to ANSYS.
Absolutely.
That's a hard thing. Welcome to the team. Don't do anything like you used to do it.
So that definitely is a cultural change, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. So that definitely worked for me. And every 3 to 5 years, I would try to pay attention to that. The other is skill set, obviously. So as you get into management, I think you learn a lot of skills, right? Not just technical aspects of it, but also how you manage people, bigger teams, different aspects.
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit. I don't know that you learn a lot of skills, but you need a lot of skills, and you either sink or swim.
That is correct.
I hate to keep picking on this one point. I see this huge shortcoming in how we equip managers, and I'm going to keep pointing it out if it's useful to people, that like you can't just promote your top sales rep and now all of a sudden they have the requirements to be a sales manager. You can't take your top engineer and all of a sudden they know how to be soft with people that are going through a hard time. Management is a totally different skill set.
I agree, but you also get exposed to a lot of things where you can reinvent yourself, right? So you start learning because of that.
Right.
So it is a learning process, but you're absolutely right. I mean, nobody teaches you these things, and I've seen some managers, stagnate or hit the ceiling, right? The glass ceiling. So it is a learning process in the sense that you've got to reinvent yourself. You've got to learn from the experience, and you've got to give in, right? And trust is a big thing to me. So trust, for example, a lot initially, at least for me, I thought trust was having people behave the way you expected them to behave.
Yeah.
Right? That is trust. I mean, if you are doing what I'm doing or what I'm asking you to do, then I'm going to trust you.
Yes.
But I soon learned that that's not a good strategy, right?
Really?
I think,
because I agreed with everything you said.
Yes. I think later on I learned that being vulnerable to that person makes you trust that person more. And that's a sacrifice you have to make. So it is you making the change, not the other person making the change.
I like the statement, and I say it a lot, that you have to be strong enough to be weak.
Right.
Right. You have to be strong enough to allow yourself to be vulnerable
Absolutely.
to that.
Right.
And that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, including like, if you let the team down, it's because I let you do it.
Right.
And this is why it's so critically important. I made a decision not to perch on your shoulder like a parrot and watch you work all day long.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And the other aspect to that is, you got to let them fail as well, right? So
exactly.
Because your success depends on them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you are vulnerable,
Yeah.
right, if they fail. So failure should be an option.
I've always felt that a bend not break person does better with the psychological pressure of going up the corporate ladder or going up in responsibility. Failure is not just an option, it's an undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
And when you realize that, you become pliable to, like, I will survive this.
Right.
It's people that are too hard that break.
Right. And the other thing is, you have to be careful though. You can't keep making mistakes all the time, the same mistakes. Right. So you make one mistake, you learn from it. And the second mistake should be a different mistake, because now you have another opportunity to learn. So,
you gave me a great way to jump off into a different topic here, and I'm going to take it. Originally, I was like, you know what? The next thing we should talk about is TiE Pittsburgh. But I'm changing gears because what you just said speaks perfectly to your experience as an investor.
Okay.
People that make the same mistake over and over again are a great insertion point into that conversation.
Right.
I always love to ask people what they invest in or what they look for, right? What I heard you just say is you're looking for people who learn from their mistakes. Is that a fair statement when you look at investments?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is very true. So they should definitely be coachable. They should demonstrate that they can listen to other people and learn from their own mistakes. The other thing that is very critical, especially I look for companies, that I invest in, it has to have the scalability, right? So it's not just a good idea, but it's definitely something that you can influence a lot of people. So, you've heard this statement that if you want to make $1 billion, touch 1 billion lives. Right. So if you have to have a good business that you want to scale up, right? So there's a difference between a business and the startup, right? The business, like a barber, is
it's
a business.
Mature.
I mean, it's a huge market, right? But you cannot reach that market. You cannot really cut everybody's hair, right? You cannot reach that market.
Never say never.
Right. Right. Or a plumber or electrician, right? So, and many of them are doing well, right? But they cannot scale up.
Right.
Startup is different, right? So startup, the idea is good. It has to be a new thing, a novel idea, right? An innovation. It has to have a big market. And so it doesn't have to be high tech. It can be low tech or no tech. But these parameters should play. Yeah, definitely.
You're looking for something scalable as one of your
something
first
absolutely
priorities.
Scalable. And then from a team perspective, a team that is gels, has some experience and can learn from their experiences, from their failures, right?
Okay.
And coachable.
Super high focus, and you and I share this, super high focus on a resilient attitude toward the challenges that are coming, whether they know they're coming or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So because you have to be, for example, prepared to pivot, right? And a lot of businesses I've seen, a lot of startups, about, I would say 60 to 80% of them nowadays, learn from their customer discovery, product market fit. They're doing everything right because now you get a lot of support. These days, you get a lot of support. You can go to mentors, you can go to educational programs, entrepreneurial programs, and they teach you, the process, basically. Mm-hmm. And when you go through the process, you end up learning so much that you have to pivot.
Absolutely, you do. You start off with an idea that you think will work, and then you learn a lot along the way.
Right.
And TiE Pittsburgh, one of the things that I noticed about you all first was how many seminars, how many workshops, how many, for lack of a better word, like
events,
participatory events. Events are one thing, but participatory events, where, in other words, like an expert who has been in your shoes or has specific domain knowledge is available to someone who is trying to claw their way up into the marketplace. And I think that's interesting. Let's start with the basic definition of what TiE is so that we're not losing anybody in the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity there. So TiE basically stands for the Indus Entrepreneurs. So,
the Indus Entrepreneurs.
Right. So TiE was started in 1992 by three Indo-American entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Right? One of them was an MIT professor. His name was Kamal Reiki. So he was the founder of Cirrus Logic. I don't know if you remember Cirrus Logic.
It's been a while, but yeah.
So he was the founder of Cirrus Logic, and along with two other Indian guys who were in the Silicon Valley, they started this company, or rather this nonprofit, TiE Pittsburgh. And from then on, it caught on because what they were doing was startups were just starting to sort of flourish at the time. And they said, these folks are going to need some investment. Some funding. So that's what they started doing. And that idea caught on. And then a lot of other chapters started growing. So today we have about 60 plus chapters across the globe. Many of them are in the US. And Pittsburgh chapter was started in the year 2000. And since then, so we've been around for 18, 19 years now.
Yeah.
Right. So what we do is we're a nonprofit for entrepreneurs, by entrepreneurs. And the way we do that is through networking, through education, funding, and mentoring. So we have events and programs that support these things, these four areas.
Yeah.
And that's how we support entrepreneurs.
So tell me about the Indus angle. Is that naming the organization after the founders? Or was it originally designed as a support network for people that had an Indian heritage that maybe needed a little bit of support?
Yeah, that's how it started. So it was in India, US, right? That's how it started. So if you look at the makeup of all the chapters and the founders and the presidents, there are a lot of Indian people, right? But of late, in the last about 5 to 7 years, I think that there's a shift. There's a significant shift. So many of the presidents of many of the chapters, are non-Indian, right? The membership has also become more diluted in terms of, and more cosmopolitan, right? So for example, Pittsburgh, 30-40% of the members are non-Indian, right? Which is a great thing. So now they're thinking of changing the name to maybe, the technology and innovation entrepreneurs or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's called TiE. It's called TiE, right? And everybody's contributing, and it's great.
Well, I have to ask because, a lot of times when we talk about cultural differences and whatnot, Indian in America frankly doesn't rank in like the top 3 or 4 categories of that conversation. I'm not sure why. I'm not a sociologist, but it is somewhat interesting to me because on the one end, I have heard, and this is true, I am sure you've heard the same, well, I don't trust a technical team that doesn't have at least one South Asian engineer. and we sort of accept that type of, whatever you want to call it, that sort of prejudice, right? And I can't help but think that it wasn't always that way, though, too, right? Like in 1992, like you're discussing, it probably was at least different. And I'm fascinated from that angle because here we are now, and like you said, something called the Indus Entrepreneurs has 30 to 40% non-Indian membership. It's fascinating to me watching these things flourish and grow. You studied in India.
Yes,
and then you came to the US and you earned your master's here. That's right?
I did. I did my master's at Villanova, yes.
So you had a pretty radical culture shift.
I did.
And you've seen a big change in terms of like what you should expect when you show up. Tell me about that.
So basically, here's my take on this, right? The reason people migrate from India to the US is not to drink beer and watch football.
Well, there goes that theory.
Right. So basically, there's 2 or 3 reasons why they come here. One is for higher studies, right? Which is why I came here.
Okay.
Right. Because I used to work for an automotive company, after I graduated. And I was getting paid pretty well. They trained me pretty well.
Yeah.
But then I got assigned into a shop floor type of job, right, as a mechanical engineer.
Right.
And I said, I started picturing myself 10 years, 15 years down the road. So I said, I'm going to be building clutches or designing clutches for the rest of my life, right? Or brakes or whatever, one component.
All of a sudden, that clenching fear starts to set in, right?
Correct. So then you say, this is not how I want to grow. Right. So what do I do next? Because my inclination was more towards doing research, doing something above and beyond being on the shop floor. Right. Yeah. So I said, okay, better do some higher studies. Right. I could go into management, but I was more, as I said before, I was more on the technical side.
Yeah.
So when I came here, I did my master's in mechanical engineer. So that's one reason why they come. The second reason they come is, they're posted here. They have a job, like a consulting firm hires them and then sends them here for a client. Right. So they're working for a client in the US. So they come for business.
Right.
And the third, obviously, is to get rich in some way. I know some.
They fit in better than some people, right?
Yeah. I have some friends of mine whose goal was, I want to get rich. So I'm going land of opportunity, America.
Let's get back to TiE. It's not an expensive membership, though. I want to say it was not. It was less than $200 if I remember correctly.
It's $100 a year.
Yeah.
That's a membership.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of benefits. You get to attend all events for free.
Yeah.
Plus, if you're going outside of town, going to other chapters, for example, like Boston, you can attend their events.
Oh, I didn't even know that part.
Right. So if you're traveling.
You've done a lot of these like business roundtables. That's probably not the right name you like to use. What is it, BMR?
We call it a BMR. It's a business mentoring roundtable.
Mentoring roundtable. I almost had it.
Yes.
For fairness, though, that didn't come out of my notes. That came out of my memory. So I was bound to screw that up. But that brings these founders in that haven't quite popped onto the scene yet. And you're actually getting under the hood. You had Mendel Bassman, for example, come in and actually win one of your contests.
Absolutely.
And got under the hood. Mendel was on our show.
Is that right?
We took a look at smart tire recycling a little while ago. And that's fascinating to me. I think it's really useful. And that's what I meant when I said these interactive events where people are... No disrespect to people who have a lecture style. But I think one of the things that people like about this show is that we actually look at what people are doing and how does it work and why does it work and how can it be improved and what can we talk about, right? And that's what I like about your events.
Yes. Every month, we do this every month. We invite 2 companies, 2 startups that come in and pitch. And we have about 5 or 6 of our charter members sitting in the audience. We also invite some of our sponsors who are interested in giving feedback. Yeah. And also students. We have students from Duquesne or CMU come in and sit there so they can learn from it, right? So that we also get the educational aspect in there. But basically, they do a 20-minute pitch and a 40-minute discussion, and that's where they get a lot of feedback.
Absolutely, from people who have some insight. Whether it's the same industry is not relevant. It's about how did you tell your story?
How did you tell your story? How's your business model? What can you learn from the experience that's in the room? Many of them ask us direct questions. Like, for example, I want to license my product in China. How do I do that?
Right.
Right.
Which is a very practical question.
Right, exactly. So things like that, right? So they get a good amount of feedback and they can come back. They can take that feedback, make changes, and come back later if they want to, or not come back and just basically, maybe use a network to connect one-on-one with mentors. Yeah. And sometimes mentors will also connect them with other people, like funding organizations or other mentors.
If I were an angel or VC, I'd probably show up at BMR just because I want to. Absolutely, I want to hear what's in the pipeline, right?
Like, yes. And you're most welcome to sit in one of our sessions and watch what's going on.
Sold. That we'll make that happen. One of the things I notice whenever I go to these things is there are common mistakes that get made over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Which ones do you see?
In terms of the pitches?
That 20-minute pitch, right?
Yeah, the pitch. What people do is they forget who they are pitching to, right? So, and that's very critical, right? So, for example, if you're pitching to somebody, when we do the pitches in the BMR, we are expecting them to air their dirty laundry, right?
Okay.
So we can give them feedback.
Right.
So you don't want to hide the facts that you're actually trying to solve.
Right.
Right. So we actually listen for what's not said.
Right. That makes sense.
That makes sense. So,
because you don't know who's in the gallery and who it is. They're afraid that they might accidentally say something that might hurt them with somebody in the gallery. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And the other thing is, they think they're pitching to investors, but they're not. Right. There are investors in the audience sometimes. Right. But the purpose is not that as soon as they finish the pitch, they're going to write a check.
Well, it's like being on this show, right? Like you don't come on this show because investors are listening so closely for your perfection. And if you were ever to posit that you were actually perfect, you'd never get an invite in the first place.
Absolutely.
I see it all the time where people think that they're supposed to look 100% perfect. And even when I'm talking to my own kids, I say there's no such thing as done. Everything's a work in progress. And once you embrace that as a philosophy, it's a little bit easier to be strong enough to be weak, to go back to what we were saying before.
Absolutely.
And say, all right, here's the stuff I'm pretty good at. Here's the stuff I'm okay at. Here's the stuff I'm really suffering at. I'm hiring people to bolster my failings. Give me a plan I can work with, right?
Right. And the other mistake they make is get too much into the details of the technical solution.
Oh, you just hit the one I was going to say.
Yeah. We're not looking for that. Right. We're looking for, okay, what problem are you solving? Mm-hmm. Not so much how you're solving it, although that is important. Is there a product market fit? Have you tested that? What have you learned from that? Have you pivoted?
Yeah.
How many times have you pivoted? And how are you going to reach your market?
How do you know what you say you know? How will you change if you find out you're wrong? This is the thing that I've kind of gone down like a weird rabbit hole where I'm seeing this problem everywhere, and I've right or wrong, I've started just referring to product people, quote unquote product people. And I'm probably being a jerk about it, and I probably need to rectify that. But product people are everywhere in these pitch rooms I'm at right now, where they come in and they say, like, let's spend 14 of my 20 minutes on my experience, why I came up with this, what it's like being a person in the industry that I'm trying to help. Let me give you 18 bullet points and then read them to you, right? Mm-hmm. And then every time I read one, I'm also going to give a helpful anecdote that buttresses my bullet point.
Right.
Okay, by the way, here's some money. Here's my team. And they blow through the bit where it's an investment.
Right.
How many times when you see a founder, do they remind you of something you did in the past, where you give them that cautionary tale of like, you better take charge of your own direction? Does that happen a lot?
Well, it hasn't happened a lot.
Okay.
Because I have a certain different kind of respect for the founders, right? Because I was never a founder. I mean, I started 2 companies, right? But I wouldn't call them startups, right? It was more like a business. And the reason my motivation in doing that was basically to get out of the mold, because I loved what I was doing.
Yes.
Right. But I wanted to see what's outside, what's out there.
I did this.
Networking was a big thing. And also, what do small businesses actually do? How do they run a business? So that's why I started these other businesses, right? And I said, I learned a lot from that. First thing I learned was these people have to struggle a lot, right? They have to struggle difficult. Quite a bit. The way they promote their business is very different, right? And I said, well, this is not what I want to do, right? What I want to do is maybe do a startup, because startup is where you can scale up. You have innovation, so different parameters, right?
I get it, yeah.
So, and then you look at all these founders these days, right? Now, coming back to your question, the founders, they're different nowadays, right? I mean...
Different how?
Different in the sense, in the past, maybe 30, 40 years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, an entrepreneur was actually considered a person who had no other...
Yes, right.
ways of doing, not educated, so I'm going to start a new bar, right? Mm-hmm. So an entrepreneur, there was some sort of stigma attached with an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You look at it now.
And it's fashionable.
MIT, Harvard graduates, they come out, they get training in entrepreneurship. There's a lot of support, especially in a city like Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, CMU, Duquesne, Pitt, they have entrepreneurial programs.
Absolutely.
There's funding available, right? There is mentorship available. There's all kinds of stuff available.
I think there are good things that come out of all the structure you just mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're a Robert Morris student or a CMU student or a Pitt student or whatever, you kind of get indoctrinated into, and that's a loaded word, into you start with your friends and family, you move on to seed, you move on to angel, you go on to VC, and now you're a unicorn and everyone knows your name and your app is on everyone's phone, right? How many of those do you know personally that went through that exactly that way? You could probably count them on one hand.
Absolutely, agreed.
But we know that we help a lot of people that maybe aren't capital S startups, right? And what I think we accidentally do is we teach people to follow a specific path that we laid out instead of teaching the resilience that was originally the intent of the entrepreneurial program, et cetera. And that some businesses are bootstrappable and some businesses can get by with no funding. Some businesses need 5 years and $50 million in order to first be able to get certified as a FDA approved product.
Absolutely. So yeah, from that perspective, yes, absolutely. We look at founders and try to coach them into being more malleable.
Yeah.
Right? That be prepared to pivot.
Well, you do. But what I'm saying is you also got to tell people, take responsibility for the outcome you want, which starts with, what outcome do you want, sir? Prashant, I'm so glad you came here to the Pitchwerks studio with your new business idea. What outcome do you want is the first question. Your outcome determines the path.
Absolutely.
And you knew that at an earlier age than most. And I just wonder if you ever talk to a founder and they say to you, well, what am I supposed to do next? And you have to stop them and like, no. This is your movie. We're just trying to support you along the path.
Exactly. The decision is theirs. And
right.
They have to decide. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. But I think the thing is for a startup nowadays, it's everyone wants to be an exponential, right? What they call exponential or a unicorn. Yep. And basically, if that is their goal, then you have to basically digitize, right?
Right.
Democratize and demonetize and then dematerialize. So these are the 4 Ds, right? If you do these right, you will become a unicorn. I mean, think about it, right? Look at, for example, a good example is photography.
Okay.
Like Kodak.
Yeah.
Remember those little films we used to buy?
Yeah.
And then take pictures in our Yashica camera.
Absolutely.
Right? And then take it to Walmart and or
drop it in that little paper bag in the little wooden box at the front of the store.
Right. So from snap to picture, it took about 3 or 4 days? Right?
Yeah. Unless you paid for rush service.
Right. Then it got digitized, with phones, and then democratized. Everybody's using it. Demonetized. How much do you pay to get a picture now?
Nothing.
0. Zilch. Right?
Yeah.
And dematerialized. There's no material. There's no film.
That's right.
Same with written communication.
Right.
Right?
Email. When's the last time you wrote out a letter? Right.
Maps. Remember triptychs?
I do.
You used to go to AAA.
I just explained triptychs like 2 weeks ago to a completely incredulous millennial who was like, I can't believe you ever did that.
Absolutely. They would highlight the map for you,
Yeah, this guy's like 31 years old looking at me like I'm having some sort of an episode when I explain how triptychs worked.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get where this makes sense.
Yeah, so I think that is the path, right? The question is, how do you get on that path and how do you become the unicorn? If you have the right idea, and if you know the process,
right,
you can make it.
So if people want to reach out, if they maybe have a business that they're working on, or at least want to find out about TiE Pittsburgh and the things you're doing over there, how would they do that?
So just go to pittsburgh.tie.org.
Okay.
And they can look at the BMR, look at our programs, and they can apply for it.
I'm really glad I didn't try to do that from memory because I would have told them the wrong thing. Prashant Ambe, thank you for coming into the studio.
Thank you, Scott. You're doing great work. Thank you for having me today.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, that's all the time we have. Make sure you check out pittsburgh.tie.org if you are local and interested. Otherwise, you're just going to have to find your own local chapter. And frankly, I'm sorry, that's just not on me. We'll catch you next Wednesday. Buzzy and I are going to make another episode of this fine program. We'll catch you there on Wednesday morning.
The Pitchwerks podcast comes to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a production of the Epicast Network and McTaggart, LLC. Engineering and production by Buzzy Torek and Nick Miller. For more information, show feedback, and ad sales, visit pitchwerks.com. PITCHWERKS.com. On social media, find and follow the show on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram using that same brand name, PITCHWERKS.